Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I still remember the exact shade of lipstick she was wearing when she leaned in close to me, just inches from my ear, the faint scent of lavender and judgment thick in the air between us. It was called Wine Envy, or something absurd like that, dark as dried blood and just as ominous. Her voice was soft, eerily soft, like she was telling me a bedtime story instead of detonating a truth bomb at my own damn engagement party. "He'll leave you like he did the others," she said, then smiled as if she'd just complimented my shoes instead of ripping a hole in the illusion I'd built around her son. I froze for half a second. Maybe a full one. Not visibly, I don't think. But internally, it felt like time stopped, like the wine glass in my hand grew heavier and the room got quieter even though the string quartet was still playing some overused classical love song behind us. I smiled back at her, instinctively, the way I'd learned to as a kid raised by people who believed silence was strength and a smile was armor. I said, "Thank you for coming," like I hadn't just heard the opening line to what might have been the script of my future unraveling. The truth is, I'd spent weeks convincing myself Lorna liked me. Maybe not loved me, I wasn't delusional, but liked me enough to smile when I walked into the room and not actively sabotage the best thing her son had going. I thought we were slowly building some unspoken truce, the kind that women in families sometimes settle into when they both realize the man between them is emotionally stunted but well-meaning. But now? I saw it for what it was, a performance, and I just missed the cue that told me she was never going to clap. That night, after the guests had all left, after the sparklers had fizzled out and the champagne had been dumped down the drain, I lay in bed next to Adam and watched him sleep. His mouth opened slightly, one arm tossed over his forehead, like some romantic painting of a man pretending to be at peace. He looked good in sleep, too good. And for the first time since he proposed, I didn't feel excited. I felt uneasy. That whisper replayed like a loop in my brain, except each time it came with a new twist. A smirk here, a pause there, a different tone that made it sound more like a promise than a warning. Adam and I had met at a charity fundraiser, one of those catered rooftop things where everyone sips cocktails in plastic heels and pretends they care about puppies or cancer or whatever's trendy that month. He'd been all confidence and straight teeth, that kind of charming where you know it's practiced, but it still works. He told me I had the kind of eyes that made people confess things, and I'd laughed too loudly at the time. We moved fast. Too fast maybe, but it felt right. Dinners, trips, whispered plans about eloping that turned into Pinterest boards and venue tours. I met his friends, his coworkers, even his cousin who kept accidentally calling me Melissa. I should have caught that. Should have asked who Melissa was instead of brushing it off. But I didn't want to seem jealous or paranoid, not when things were finally going well for once. I told myself it was just a slip, a random name from a family filled with past stories that weren't mine to question. But now, lying there in the dark, his mother's voice gnawed at me. Who were the others? Were they Melissa? Jessica? Was I just another in a long line of almosts? The next morning, over coffee, I asked him something small, almost too casual. "Did you ever come close to getting married before?" He blinked, then shook his head like he was brushing off a fly. "Not really," he said, pouring sugar into his mug like it owed him money. "Had a couple of long-term things, but nothing serious." I nodded, even smiled. But it sat wrong, because you don't get two different women's names flubbed around you unless there were serious things he wasn't mentioning. I didn't push. I filed it away. Over the next few days, I started watching more carefully. Lorna would call and ask what color the table linens would be, and when I told her ivory, she'd pause, just long enough to make me second-guess it. She sent me a link to a wedding dress boutique with a subject line that read, "A more flattering silhouette for your figure." I didn't cry. I'd grown up with women like her, sweet as pie until the knife was in your back. I knew the game. And I wasn't about to lose it. What stuck with me wasn't the whisper. It was the fact she felt so sure of it. Not speculative. Not cruel for the sake of being cruel. It felt more like inevitability. Like she knew something I didn't. And that made me want to dig deeper. I talked to my best friend Tessa that night, and she didn't mince words. "That woman's either a witch or a narcissist," she said, tearing into a donut like it was a stress ball. "Either way, don't let her play you." I nodded. But I was already thinking ahead. There was something buried in that whisper. Something real. And I was going to find it. Who were the others? It started small, the way all slow burns do, tiny flares of unease that you brush off because love, or the idea of it, can be such a damn convincing cover for your own instincts screaming in the background. We were sitting on the couch one Saturday morning, sunlight slipping in through the blinds just enough to make the dust in the air look romantic, like this was a moment you'd frame in a photo album. I was sipping my coffee, pretending I wasn't about to ruin the vibe, when I said, almost too casually, "So, have you ever been engaged before?" He barely looked up from his phone, just shrugged with a half-smile that didn't meet his eyes. "Nothing serious," he said, the way a guy might say he once tried yoga but didn't like how it made his calves feel. Then he added, "Why?" and looked at me like I'd just accused him of something absurd, like hiding a body in the basement. I smiled. Because that's what I do. But deep down, something shifted. It's wild how a single shrug can tell you more than an entire conversation. That shrug? It said, "I'm not telling you everything, and don't ask again." And I might have let it go if not for Lorna. Lorna had this way of inserting herself into our lives like she was a piece of vintage furniture nobody wanted but couldn't throw away because it belonged to someone's great-aunt. She started showing up without calling, bringing Tupperware full of dishes we didn't ask for, dry meatloaf, aggressive potato salad, and that weird Jell-O with suspended chunks of mystery fruit. She'd waltz in with that same damn lavender perfume cloud and start commenting on everything, from the way I folded the towels to the tone of my voice when I asked Adam about the wedding budget. The real kicker came when we were looking at wedding dresses. I'd brought my best friend Tessa with me, and the whole thing was supposed to be a girls' day, champagne, lace, laughter, maybe a little crying. But somehow, Lorna showed up halfway through the appointment like she'd gotten a secret calendar invite. She walked in, looked me up and down, and said, "Oh, I see you're going for bold, which is just Southern code for that dress. Makes your hips look like they're hosting a block party." Tessa squeezed my hand so hard I lost circulation. I almost laughed, because who even says that? But I didn't. I just looked her in the eye and said, "You know what they say, go bold or go home." She didn't flinch, which honestly made me respect her a tiny bit. Only a woman that confident in her manipulation can stand there and smile while she undermines you in front of a three-way mirror. But the real gut punch came 2 days later. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through RSVPs, when Lorna made some offhand comment about Jessica's invitations being much classier. I froze. Adam looked like someone had yanked the cord on his operating system. He blinked twice and muttered something about his mom being tired. I let it go. On the outside. But inside? Oh, inside I was making a list. Jessica. Not a common name. Not rare either. But it was specific enough. Later that night, while Adam was in the shower, I slipped into his office and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. The one he kept locked until recently when I saw him forget to put the key away. There it was, an old black notebook. Not full of secrets, not dramatic. Just names, phone numbers, restaurant receipts. But near the middle, scribbled in blue ink, I saw it. Jessica M. Cell. Seattle area code. And right beneath it? Melissa. That's when the math started spinning in my head. It was just 3 years ago he was engaged to Jessica, and then 5 years before that too. I think her name was Melissa. That's, almost 9 years of failed relationships into. I actually said that out loud to Tessa over the phone later, and she went dead silent for a second before snapping, "Claire, do you hear yourself? That doesn't even make sense. You mean 8 years in total, not 9 and 2. What kind of math is that?" We both laughed, kind of. But it wasn't funny. Not really. I waited until the house was quiet, when the only sounds were the hum of the fridge and Adam's breathing from the bedroom, slow and steady like someone with nothing to hide. I stared at the number in my hand, thumb hovering over the screen like I was defusing a bomb. I didn't call her. Not yet. But I saved the number. Labeled it Plumber, in case he snooped. And that night, as I lay beside him, feeling the heat of his body without the warmth of his trust, I realized something bone deep. I was already losing him, and he didn't even know it yet. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's why he didn't say Jessica's name. Maybe that's why Lorna did. The coffee shop was one of those painfully hip little places with hanging Edison bulbs, recycled wood tables, and baristas who looked like they were auditioning for a folk band no one wanted to listen to. It was raining, of course. It always seems to be when your life is about to shift from suspicious to undeniably messed up. I was already seated at a corner table, fingers wrapped tightly around a lukewarm mug I hadn't touched, when Jessica walked in wearing a green coat that made her look way more put together than I had expected. I don't know why, but part of me wanted her to look broken, like someone who still hadn't recovered from being dumped or discarded. Instead, she walked with the kind of posture that said, "I've seen the storm and I survived it." I stood to greet her, though I wasn't sure if a handshake or a hug was appropriate when you're meeting your fiancé's ex-fiancé in real life. She extended her hand first, firm grip, no hesitation, no fake smile. That was the first clue. The second was the way she looked at me, not with pity, not with jealousy, but with something colder, more complex. Like she already knew why I was here and didn't want to waste time on pleasantries. We sat down. I tried to open with something neutral. "Thanks for meeting me. I know this is weird." She nodded slowly, still looking me over, and then said, "No, it's not weird. It's necessary." The silence that followed was loud enough to make the espresso machine in the background sound like a jet engine. I took a deep breath and went straight for it. "How long were you engaged?" 7 months, she said, immediately, like she'd rehearsed it. It started out fast. Intense. He was charming, funny, attentive, thoughtful in all the textbook ways. Gifts out of nowhere, little love notes in my lunch, talking about houses and babies before I even had time to realize he hadn't really shared anything real about himself. That part struck a nerve. I realized that I didn't know what Adam's favorite book was, or whether he believed in God, or why he always got tense whenever someone mentioned the 4th of July. I'd filled in so many blanks with assumptions, mostly because he always gave me just enough to make me feel like I wasn't missing anything. Jessica leaned in then, voice lower now, like what she was about to say was sacred or cursed. It shifted after we got engaged. Suddenly, he was busy all the time. Clients, meetings, phone calls that couldn't wait, text messages he wouldn't answer in front of me. He'd sit beside me on the couch, but act like I was in another room. The affection didn't stop, it just got colder. Routine. Like he was mimicking what love should look like instead of actually feeling it. My throat tightened. I hadn't told her anything about what was happening with me and Adam lately, but she was describing it like she'd been watching from the next room. The detachment, the excuses, the new wall between us that I couldn't explain with stress or planning fatigue. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, that maybe I'd said the wrong thing or pushed too hard when I asked about Lorna's interference. But now, sitting here with this woman who looked me in the eye without blinking, I realized I wasn't the first to feel this shift. And I probably wouldn't have been the last. "He doesn't like being known," Jessica added, now stirring her coffee though she hadn't taken a sip. "He likes the idea of intimacy, but not the reality of it. As soon as you start peeling back the layers, he disappears into his work or blames you for being too intense, too demanding. It's like he punishes you for trying to love him deeply." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was terrifying how familiar that sounded. The little criticisms he'd started sneaking into our conversations. The way he'd respond with silence instead of words when I asked about something that mattered. How he'd hold my hand but never my gaze when I asked, "Are we okay?" Jessica finally sipped her coffee and gave me this long, tired look that made her seem decades older than me, like surviving Adam had cost her time she'd never get back. "He's not evil," she said. "He's not abusive, but he'll drain you slowly and call it compatibility issues. And when he leaves, it'll be your fault. In his head, at least." I swallowed hard. "Why did he leave you?" She smiled for the first time, but it wasn't warm. "I beat him to it." I walked out of that cafe with rain, soaking my hair and questions filling my chest like cement. Tessa called just as I was getting in the car, and the first thing she said, before I even told her what happened, was, "Claire, get out. Don't do this to yourself. You're not going to fix him. He doesn't want to be fixed." But I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shaking. Because somewhere between Jessica's warning and Tessa's pleading, I realized something powerful. I wasn't going to run. Not yet. I was going to stay. I was going to smile. And I was going to set the whole damn table before I flipped it over. Let him think I was planning a wedding. What I was really planning was my next move. There's something strange about the way people look at a woman in love, like she's both fragile and lucky, like she's finally been chosen for something golden and clean, as if being engaged turns your entire existence into a filtered Instagram post, soft light, perfectly arranged flowers, and not a single dirty dish in the sink. And I leaned into that image. Oh, I leaned in hard. I smiled wider, laughed softer, nodded during conversations as if everything in my world was exactly how I wanted it. And they all believed it, every single person around me, even Adam, especially Adam. He didn't see the way my eyes stayed open long into the night, staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me like a man without a care in the world. He didn't notice that I'd stopped sharing the wedding planning folder with his mother, that the shared Google Doc she used to comment on with her passive-aggressive opinions had been quietly revoked. I left it up for a while, just static, no changes, no updates, just enough to make her think she was still part of it. Then one day I took the whole thing offline, made a new folder, a private one, and started moving everything over. The caterer got a new email. The florist got a new phone number. The RSVP return address went from Adam's apartment to a P.O. box I opened downtown, one he didn't even know existed. At first it felt petty, almost juvenile, like I was pulling some mean girl high school prank. But then it started to feel like power. Real, tangible power. And I wasn't about to give that up. It's amazing what you can do when you smile enough. People think a smiling woman is harmless, agreeable, soft. They never think to ask what she's hiding under the surface. I wasn't angry, not visibly. I didn't lash out, didn't accuse him of lying, didn't bring up Jessica again, didn't say Melissa's name even once. I just started watching, closely, quietly, noticing the little things. He began working late more often, but not late like before. These were abrupt exits, urgent client meetings after dinner, half-finished conversations that ended with his phone buzzing conveniently. I started checking his laptop when he left the room, not in a dramatic movie scene way, but methodically. Email logins, calendar invites, bank apps. One night while he was in the shower, I finally hit the right password for one of his private folders. His browser had saved it from months ago, and there it was. A second bank account. Not hidden exactly, just unmentioned. In his name only. No activity tied to the wedding, no shared expenses, no deposits from his job. Just quiet, steady withdrawals, some as small as $40, others as large as 1,000. To places I didn't recognize, boutiques, hotels, one very expensive restaurant in Napa Valley dated 2 months into our engagement. That one made me close the laptop slowly, take a breath, and then pour myself a glass of wine like I wasn't planning to choke on it. When I asked him about Napa, casually, like I'd read about a restaurant opening there, he looked at me blankly and said, "I haven't been to Napa in years." He said it without blinking, without flinching, like he'd trained for it. I smiled. Said we should take a trip there someday. He nodded, distracted, and went back to his phone. It was then I knew that the man I was planning to marry, this man who had proposed in front of a fountain while strangers applauded, had been lying to me so seamlessly, so expertly, that I wasn't even angry. I was impressed. Impressed and disgusted. Because it wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about the ease with which he operated inside the lie, like it was home. So I planned a dinner. A special dinner. I told him it was to celebrate the final wedding menu selections, something intimate. Just us, maybe his mother, if she behaved. I picked a restaurant he loved, the kind with overpriced cocktails and flattering lighting. He wore his usual fitted blazer and looked perfect, annoyingly perfect. He smiled at me when he arrived, kissed my cheek, asked what we were drinking. I said, "We're waiting on 2 more," and watched him pale just a little. He thought I meant Tessa and someone else, maybe the planner. But when Jessica walked in first, followed by Melissa, both in sleek black dresses like we were staging a reunion of Exes Anonymous, he dropped the wine list like it burned him. Melissa sat first, gave him a little wave. Jessica nodded once, cool and calm. He looked at me, mouth opening to speak, but I just lifted my glass and said, "Thought we could all talk wedding stories." He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, murmured something about an emergency call, and walked out like a man running from a house on fire. The 3 of us sat there in the flickering candlelight, sipping wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jessica toasted. "To near misses," she said. Melissa laughed. I smiled, finally, not the kind of smile you fake, but the kind that comes when the cards are on the table and you're the one holding the aces. By the time the entrees arrived, we were telling stories. Honest ones. Stories about a man who had never grown up, who made women feel like the problem for expecting consistency or truth. A man who knew how to perform affection, but never risked being real. When the check came, I paid it. I'd planned that too. And as the others left, hugging me with a surprising softness, I stayed behind for one more glass of wine. I looked at the empty seat across from me and let the silence settle. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, smiling at the glass in front of me, knowing that the next move was mine and mine alone. 2 months before the wedding, the energy in the house changed from cold detachment to something sharp and dangerous, like the air before a thunderstorm you can't quite see yet, but know is about to rip everything apart. By then, the lie had become the stage, and I was the only one still acting in it, not because I wanted the wedding to happen, not because I still believed in the fairy tale, but because I wanted the finale to be mine, scripted on my terms, with every spotlight pointed exactly where I needed it to shine. The guest list was finalized, the venue paid in full under my name alone, and every vendor had strict instructions. Any calls or messages from Lorna were to be ignored, deleted, or reported directly to me. Blocking her from the planning process wasn't a sudden move, not some burst of revenge in a flash of rage. It was slow, methodical, calculated. First, her name was quietly removed from the RSVP contact list, then the group emails. The wedding planner, a professional woman who had seen her share of toxic in-laws, didn't even blink when I told her, "We're keeping things intimate now. Just people who truly support us." When Lorna asked why she hadn't received an updated itinerary, I told her I'd double-check the mailing list, knowing damn well I hadn't forgotten anything. I had deleted her from every spreadsheet, every note, every digital fingerprint of this day. It didn't take long before she started pushing back, making her usual passive-aggressive calls to Adam, claiming she was confused and hurt, spinning a familiar web of martyrdom with a side of motherly guilt. And Adam, of course, believed her, because believing her meant he didn't have to confront the much harder truth that maybe, just maybe, his mother had been the poison in every failed relationship he'd left behind. He didn't see the patterns, not until I put them in front of him. It all came to a head when she tried to show up at a scheduled venue visit, the final walkthrough before we locked in the seating and lighting. I was standing near the front entrance with the coordinator when I saw her step out of a black town car, dressed in what I can only describe as funeral chic black blazer, pearl earrings, hair sprayed so stiff it looked like a helmet. She tried to walk in like she belonged, but I met her halfway. The security guard stepped forward, and I looked him dead in the eye and said, loud enough for her to hear, that woman is not family. She is not on the list. Her face turned to stone. She opened her mouth, ready to spill another backhanded greeting, but I turned and walked away without a word, leaving her to sputter her lies to a man who was paid not to care. That night, Adam confronted me in the kitchen, voice raised for the first time in months. You had no right, he said, hands clenched at his sides like he was trying not to punch a wall. She's my mother, Claire. You don't get to just erase her. And I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I just handed him a folder, a real, printed folder, because some things deserve to be presented on paper. Inside were screenshots, printed and labeled, of messages exchanged between Lorna and both Jessica and Melissa. Conversations where she told them they'd never be good enough, where she coached them on what to say to avoid confrontation, where she bragged about how he always comes back home, eventually. One even had a date and time that matched a mysterious trip Adam once told me he couldn't remember. He stood there staring at the pages, lips parted, eyes darting across the text like they were written in a language he was only just now beginning to understand. I saw something crack in him, not just anger or confusion, but the beginning of actual doubt, the kind that shakes your foundation when you realize the person who raised you might have been planting landmines in your relationships for decades. I don't know what to believe, he finally said, voice quieter, broken almost, like a man finally realizing he's been living in a house of mirrors. I nodded once. I know. I didn't try to comfort him. I didn't hold his hand or tell him it would be okay. Because it wouldn't be. Not for him. Not anymore. And then the invitations went out. Thick, cream-colored paper with gold embossed lettering, sent in individual boxes with wax seals and handwritten notes. Claire Hartley. That was the name on the invite. No +1. No groom. No second name following mine. Just one seat, one name, one celebration. I booked the venue, hired the caterer, kept the playlist, but the ceremony was rewritten. Not a wedding. A reclamation. I walked myself down the aisle in a champagne-colored gown that shimmered like sunlight on glass, no veil, no bouquet, no one waiting at the altar. The guests stood in silence, unsure at first if this was performance art or breakdown theater. But when I reached the altar and turned to face them, I gave a small bow and said, "Thank you all for coming to witness me choosing myself, for once, for real, for good." And they clapped. Even Tessa cried. I danced until midnight with no husband, no in-laws, no promises made to someone I could no longer trust. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't sad. It was joy, clean and hard-earned. And no, I didn't send Lorna an invite. But I did mail her a thank you note.